Welcome to this explainer. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis isn't just a bizarre, surreal piece of fiction. If we look a little closer, it's actually a chillingly accurate corporate case study on systemic crushing and modern burnout.
So, before we even dive into the history here, I want you to ask yourself a pretty heavy question. Have you ever woken up feeling completely paralyzed by the demands of your job? Really hold on to that feeling for a second, because it perfectly connects a novella written way back in 1915 to our exact modern reality today. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the systemic grid, the Kafkaesque protocol, the commercial insect, the audit of human capital, and finally, what I like to call the 21st century buck. Let's get right into it.
Starting with part 1, the systemic grid. We need to understand the world that built this machine.
Picture Prague at the dawn of the 20th century. It's this incredibly tense, multicultural pressure cooker trapped inside the decaying Austro-Hungarian Empire. You had a Czech demographic majority, a German ruling elite, and a distinct Jewish minority. All of this created a profound sense of political isolation and non-belonging. Suddenly, you throw in hyper-accelerated corporate growth, rigid railway schedules, and strict quotas, and the human worker gets turned into a totally disposable component. If you failed to comply within this massive productive apparatus, you faced immediate poverty. And right in the middle of all this chaos, in 1915, Kafka publishes The Metamorphosis.
And honestly, Kafka himself was the ultimate internal dissident. He was living the exact bureaucratic nightmare he was writing about. By day, he's a senior claims adjuster for an industrial workers' accident insurance corporation, just completely buried in exhausting technical reports. By night, he's obsessively writing his stories. Adding to all this immense pressure was his strict, authoritarian father, who basically instilled a permanent complex of guilt and acute inadequacy in him.
Moving on to part 2, the Kafkaesque protocol. Let's define this highly realistic nightmare.
What's absolutely wild here is how Kafka completely ditches any kind of magical, fairy tale explanations for cold, clinical, and super realistic prose. He doesn't rely on melodramatic cues at all. Instead, the total systemic horror of mutating into a monster is treated with the baseline normal metrics of a standard business day. It's terrifying precisely because it's treated as so painfully routine.
People use the word Kafkaesque all the time to just mean weird, right? But actually, scratch that. It's way more specific. It's a diagnosis of systemic entrapment. We're talking about a matrix where an individual is caught in impersonal, bureaucratic, or social grids. And crucially, they possess absolutely zero defensive leverage. They are entirely at the mercy of a system that frankly just does not care about them.
Okay, part 3, the commercial insect. We're talking literal asset liquidation here.
Just think about how this story actually kicks off. Gregor Samsa wakes up after some pretty volatile dreams to find his body transformed into an insect with hard carapace armor and thin, trembling legs. But his primary response? It isn't existential panic. He completely ignores the metaphysical horror of the situation and focuses purely on the fact that he's missed the 5 o'clock a.m. train, meaning he's going to face a severe corporate penalty. I mean, he is so deeply conditioned that his very first thought as a giant bug is literally, oh no, I'm going to be late for work. And his company is so insanely rigid that the chief manager immediately shows up at his house to audit the delay.
Now remember, Gregor was the sole financial provider for his aging parents and his sister. But the second he finally manages to unlatch his door to face the manager, the reaction is immediate and brutal. The manager flees the perimeter, his mother collapses in total shock, and his father violently forces him back into his room using a cane and a newspaper. In a split second, his role as the financial engine is completely shattered. So, since Gregor can't bring in a paycheck anymore, the family is forced out into the active labor market to cover their deficits. Meanwhile, Gregor is morally abandoned. His room degrades into a storage closet for household junk. His sister, who at first actually brought him food, soon experiences acute revulsion and completely neglects him. But the absolute peak of the violence happens when his father aggressively pelts him with apples. One embeds deep into his shell, triggering a chronic infection. It perfectly highlights the horrific irony of a father treating his own son like a routine operational hazard that just needs to be cleared off the factory floor.
Things just keep degrading. The family ends up leasing rooms to these super strict, compliance-driven tenants to make ends meet. One night, drawn by his sister's violin playing, Gregor accidentally reveals himself, triggering a huge brand scandal and contract termination from the tenants. His sister explicitly dictates that they have to get rid of the monster. Realizing he's become an unsustainable operational bottleneck for the people he loves, Gregor retreats to his room and executes a quiet shutdown. He dies of exhaustion and infection. And the ultimate chilling tragedy of it all? Upon finding his dehydrated carcass, the family runs a brief little prayer protocol, fires the maid, and happily boards a sunny streetcar to celebrate their organizational restart.
This brings us to part 4, the audit of human capital. Let's unpack this brutal utilitarianism.
When you break it down like this, it is terrifyingly clear that these supposedly warm family bonds were totally commercialized and transactional. As long as Gregor is this highly productive financial engine, he's allocated love, prestige, and baseline acceptance. But the exact microsecond he becomes non-compliant and his profit generation stops, his human dignity is summarily revoked, he's no longer a son or a brother, he's just an operational bottleneck.
And the crazy part? Gregor basically accepts this punitive isolation without any fight. Why? Because he already carries this massive, deep-seated, systemic guilt. His physical mutation into a crawling creature isn't random, it's merely an external reflection of how he already filtered his identity internally. He already viewed himself as a low-level, crawling asset, thoroughly crushed beneath the weight of authority and systemic debts. He felt guilty for failing to meet macro expectations long before he ever grew a carapace.
All right, finally, part 5, the 21st century bug. Let's connect this to right now.
Look, there's no denying Kafka's work completely re-engineered 20th century Western literature. I mean, it laid the groundwork for entire movements, from the theater of the absurd with Samuel Beckett to existentialist frameworks with Albert Camus. It permanently marked our contemporary sensitivity toward identity failure and systemic alienation. The foundational grid of the modern crisis started right here in 1915, but its technological zenith, that is actually happening to us today.
You can draw a completely direct line from that century-old industrial system straight to us today. Back in 1915, the mechanism was rigid railway schedules and basic corporate quotas, resulting in the metaphor of the Kafkaesque insect. Today, the mechanism is relentless corporate quotas, 24/7 digital tracking for hyper-performance, algorithms, and the Uberization of labor. The result? Modern burnout syndrome. So Gregor Samsa mutating into a bug, it is literally the ultimate architectural metaphor for our modern burnout. Because when contemporary professionals routinely wake up feeling totally paralyzed, exhausted, and depersonalized, trapped by displays and algorithms, well, they are living Kafka's clinical diagnosis. The exact moment modern workers fail to maintain productivity, they experience the very same invisible disposal and severe socialization mapped out over a century ago.
I want to leave you with this final thought to really chew on. What is your own psychological compliance level to the modern productive apparatus? Are you dangerously close to a quiet systemic shutdown? Ask yourself whether your worth in your own life is determined by your humanity or merely by your output. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the grid around you.